So welcome. Let's make a start of looking at a whole new system. So over the several next videos, we'll have a look of the nervous system. And as always, I do have a plan. I'm planning to divide this course material into a few different sections. So on this first video, we'll really look at the classification and different parts of the nervous system. And then we'll focus on a little bit on the cellular level of the nervous system. In addition to the other material that you'll see on the screen, we will also have two labs that go alongside with this nervous system chapter material. So we'll have a look of cranial nerves and we'll also dissect sheep brains. So as we're starting to talk about the nervous system, let's think about it in a sense that there's really two systems that control all other body systems and facilitate communication between body parts. And the first of these systems is going to be the nervous system, which is going to be the interest of our material on this chapter. Later on in the course, we'll also get to have a look of endocrine system, which is all about hormones, and we'll see how that as well has a role in the control and communication of body parts. So really, if we're thinking about how nervous system communicates, there's two methods that are involved. The first method that we're going to see is the electrical impulses, which are known as our action potentials. And these are what travels within the neurons, so within the nerve cells themselves. In addition to the electrical impulses being how nervous system passes messages onwards, we will also see chemical messages where we're moving between the neurons, where the neurons are passing messages either from another neuron to another one or from a neuron to another structure. And I think we saw a start of this in our discussion about the muscular system when we discussed the structure of a neuromuscular junction. That was where the nerve cells action ended and we got to the action terminal, which then coupled with the muscle, thus initiating the contraction of the muscle by passing those messages there. So two types of ways of passing messages within the nervous system that we'll see. Let's consider nervous system again a little bit more first in a general level. And we'll see that there's really three overlapping functions that nervous system is going to have. And the first one that I've mentioned here is really this gathering information, so sensory input. And for this, it is the sensory receptors that monitor changes. You might remember we talked about those changes as stimuli in relation to homeostatic feedback mechanism. And these changes might be happening both inside and outside the body. So that's an important role for nervous system to really collect that sensory input. The second role that I mentioned here is going to be the integration of information. So nervous system processing and interpreting the sensory inputs, deciding whether an action is needed in response to it or those is a good example of that integration level of the nervous system. And final kind of function that I'll associate here to the nervous system is the motor output. So really a response, or if you wish to call it effect, based on our homeostatic feedback loop. We're really typically seeing that we're activating either muscles or glands often with these motor outputs. And obviously, this diagram, like I referred earlier on, kind of loops back to what we discussed on our first week about the homeostatic feedback mechanism. We're seeing the same steps, just represented slightly differently on this illustration. Well, moving onwards, we can really divide nervous system or classify nervous system in two ways. First, based on the structures, and second, based on the activities that are involved. And we'll look at the structural classification first. So here we see a division into central nervous system, which is often abbreviated as CNS, and peripheral nervous system, which is abbreviated as PNS. And let's look at each of these. So central nervous system is made of the brain and the spinal cord. And together they receive the incoming sensory information, form the control center of the nervous system that performs integration of these nervous signals, and also send out outgoing instructions. Peripheral nervous system, so our PNS, is formed by the structures that are located outside the central nervous system. So these would be our nerves that come out of the brain and spinal cord. So first of these, the cranial nerves carry impulses either to or from the brain. And the second, spinal nerves carry impulses to or from the spinal cord. And really, if we think about the peripheral nervous system in a broader sense, it really serves as a communication lines amongst the sensory organs, the brain and spinal cord, and the glands or muscles that then responds. In addition to the structural classification, the nervous system can be also divided into different areas based on the functions that it does. So the first one that we're seeing here is the sensory nerve fibers that carry information to the central nervous system. And because this information is coming in, it's called afferent. And we're going to see two subcategories here. We're seeing somatic sensory fibers, which carry information from the skin, skeletal muscles, and joints. And we also see visceral sensory fibers that carry information from visceral organs. These would be, for example, the heart, lungs, and organs of the digestive, excretory, reproductive, and circulatory systems. The motor nerve fibers instead carry impulses away from the central nervous system organs to the effector organs. So these would be typically muscles and glands. And again, we're seeing two subdivisions. We're seeing somatic nervous system, which is really conscious, voluntary control. So, for example, over skeletal muscles, we get to choose when we move them and how we move. The second one is automatically controlling, for example, smooth and cardiac muscles and glands. So this is involuntary. And this can be further subdivided into sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, which we'll get to visit a little later on our nervous system material. Let's look at the two main cell types that we see in the nervous system. So first, we're going to talk about nerve cells. These are known as our neurons that are really the workhorse of the nervous system. And then we'll talk a little bit about the supporting cells to neurons. These have a few different names that get used, whether they're called glial cells or glia or neuroglia. It all means the same thing. So these are various cells grouped together because they support neurons in many different ways, and this can be physical or physiological support. So we're going to start this review by looking at the neurons. And neurons were our nerve cells. So these are cells that are specialized for transmitting messages, and these are of course going to be our nerve impulses. And there are many parts. They can be grouped under two regions, either as a cell body, which includes the nucleus and metabolic center of the cell, or processes, which are really the fibers that extend from the cell body. So let's start with the cell body first. And like I mentioned, the cell body is a metabolic center of the neuron. This is responsible for much of the processing that takes place at this level. We will also see nucleus with a large nucleolus there. And Nissl bodies are essentially rough endoplasmic reticulum that we will see there as well. Then there are neurofibrils, which are filaments that help to maintain the cell's shape. And I think at this point, let's look at the processes of a nerve cell. So there's really four processes that I want to highlight, and these are fibers that extend from the cell body. And the first one that I wanted to talk about is our dendrites. So these are structures that conduct impulses towards the cell body. I often do an analog with my students of comparing these to antennas that collect information around themselves and bring it to the cell body. And there are hundreds of dendrites per neuron. Then we have also axons. These are structures that conduct impulses away from the cell body. Typically, only one axon per neuron is present, but there are exceptions. And these arise from the cell body at the axon hillock, which we can see in the picture as this larger area of the cell body before we get to the axon itself. So let's see where these axons continue to. And axons continue to the axon terminals. These are separated from the next neuron by a gap. And synaptic cleft is this gap between the axon terminals and the next neuron. Synapse is a functional junction between the nerves where a nerve impulse is transmitted. And remember, it's going to be chemical transmission of a message here. Let's talk about myelin a little bit. Myelin is a white fatty material that covers axons, and it serves a few different roles. It protects and insulates actions of neurons, and it also speeds up the propagation of the nerve impulse, which is our action potential, along the axon. And there are two types of myelin in nervous system. We have Schwann cells, which are found in the peripheral nervous system. They wrap around the action in a jelly roll-like fashion to form this myelin layer around it. And we'll also see neurolemma, which is the part of Schwann cell that's external to the myelin sheath. We'll also see on this picture nodes of Ranvier, which are gaps in myelin sheath along the action. It is from these one gap to another that the nerve impulse is able to jump, speeding up its propagation along the axon. And then we have our oligodendrocytes, which are found in the central nervous system actions, around the axon producing the myelin cells. And these lack neurolemma. When we move from neurons to talk about nervous tissue, there are some terms that are useful for us to know. And you will see that these often draw a distinction between location, so whether it's within central or within peripheral nervous system. And they also draw a distinction whether they are myelinated or not. So a couple that I wanted to mention at this point so we feel comfortable when we see more later on. Nuclei are these clusters of cell bodies in the central nervous system. Ganglia are collections of cell bodies outside the central nervous system. So basically they are in the peripheral nervous system. Tracts are bundles of nerve fibers within the central nervous system, and nerves are bundles of nerve fibers within the peripheral nervous system. And finally, white matter is this myelinated axons of the neuron or myelinated tracts. And this is really the conduction part of the nerve tissue, moving messages from one part to another. Whereas the gray matter is mostly unmyelinated axons and the cell bodies. So I often describe my students this as a processing part of the nervous tissue. So now that we have had a look of the neurons, let's have a look of the neuroglia briefly. And neuroglia or glial cells, that's an umbrella term for a group of different kinds of cells that we find supporting neurons. This support can be both physical, so protecting the neurons, or physiological, such as insulating neurons, especially at the axons. And they resemble neurons in many ways, but are unable to conduct nerve impulses. Interestingly, neuroglia never lose their ability to divide. unlike neurons, which have a very limited ability to regenerate. So let's look at a few different types of neuroglia that we have. So all of these glial cells that we'll look at next are found within the central nervous system. Let's start with astrocytes. They are very abundant star-shaped cells that really the star appearance gives them their name. And they brace and anchor neurons to the blood vessel capillaries, and there they determine the permeability and exchanges between the blood capillaries and neurons. In that way, they protect neurons from harmful substances in blood. So they control the chemical environment of the brain, for an example. Let's have a look of the microglia. These are often described as looking like spider-like, which gives them their name, and obviously they're going to be small as well. And they are phagocytotic cells that dispose derby and monitor the health of nearby neurons. Next, let's talk about ependymal cells. These line cavities, especially in the spinal cord and the ventricles of the brain. They are ciliated, so have these small hair-like projections on the surface. And this cilia helps with moving of the cerebrospinal fluid that surrounds the brain and spinal cord in this space. And finally, from the central nervous system, neuroglia, the one we want to look at is the oligodendrocytes. We already discussed this briefly. They are responsible for producing myelin cells in the central nervous system, and they do this by wrapping around the nerve fibers and forming this myelin layer around the axon. But in addition to the central nervous system neuroglia, we also have neuroglia at the peripheral nervous system. So I have two more neuroglia for us to look at, and these were, like I said, found in the peripheral nervous system. So Schwann cells are responsible for forming myelin cells around the nerve fibers axons in the peripheral nervous system, whereas satellite cells protect and cushion the nerve cell bodies. And as we prepare to finish off this video, I wanted to highlight one clinical condition. So multiple sclerosis, MS for short, is a chronic autoimmune disease that affects the central nervous system. And it is characterized by the immune system attacking the myelin cell that produces or protects the nerve cells. And this can lead to a variety of symptoms. So the symptoms can vary from person to person, with some people experiencing mild symptoms and others experiencing very severe chronic symptoms. And there is no known cure, but medications and physical therapy can help with symptoms and slow the disease progression. So MS has a combination of both genetic and environmental causes, including certain genes, smoking, viral infections, and vitamin D deficiency. And that really brings me to the end of what I wanted to cover in this video. I'll see you at the next one, where we'll have a look of the central nervous system in a greater detail. Until that time, bye.